can do something about it.
No, don't worry about it. It's part of the charm. Yeah, this is not like a corporate video, right? We don't want to make it all fake. So hello, Iván. Welcome to the podcast. Why don't you start out by introducing yourself?
Hi, Sean. I'm very happy for being here. And well, my name is Iván. And I'm pretty excited for today's podcast because I think it's going to be one of your first ones with a C1 learner. So I'm glad and very pleased to be one of the first ones.
Yeah. So can you tell us where you are?
You probably can hear like the noise in the background. That's a rooster crowing. It's not mine, by the way. Now, I live in Machala, which is like a medium-sized city on the south, the Ecuadorian coast. So yes, I'm Ecuadorian and I live on the coast. And what I do for a living is basically I teach English, but my background, if you talk about like educational background, I did business, more specifically like economics with a major in business management. But life is surprising. And I started as an English teacher and I've been doing it for like almost 3 years. So there is like my interest in improving my English and getting to perhaps near the C2 level. It's not just like for teaching them, but also because I like to go back to my field, like to pursue a master's degree or something like that in English. And so it requires some sort of technical term and a wide range of vocabulary. So that's why I'm
in English. So which a master's in in what area?
It's a great question. So I'm still like finding. I joined a mentorship the other day. So they are providing us guidance on how to apply for scholarships and so on. But an important part of that is that you're supposed to find what you really want. And my case, speaking of myself, due to the experience I've had, I think I want to go for teaching. Therefore, it has to be a master's research degree, so I could qualify for a PhD if I ever like decided to go that way. Because so in order to teach something related to my field, I thought of economic analysis because I really like the macroeconomics. I like microeconomics. I'm kind of scared. I have like a huge respect for econometrics because it has lots of math, statistic, and involves also economic theory. Mm-hmm. So I've got to give it a thought. Like I have to sleep on that idea because I know even economic analysis can be challenging, let alone the fact that it's just about math and understanding like theories and formula and stuff like that. But I'm trying to go into that direction, but nothing's settled yet.
Okay, nice use of language. Nothing's settled. Nothing's decided. Yeah.
Nothing's decided yet. Thank you.
Yeah. So you've prepared. We talked about discussing a specific topic, and you did some reading for today's chat.
I did. Yes. So first of all, it came to my mind because one of my, maybe I don't think I've told you, but I also like sometime in the mornings, I work as a conversation practice partner for Spanish learners. So one of them told me that due to the disruption in supply chain, her business was not really doing well because she didn't have enough supply. So after the chat we had when we just like discussed this meeting or the plans for this video chat, I think it was on Monday that it came to my mind that would be a nice topic to discuss. So I did some reading. And it's very interesting because this disruption in the supply chain is not the result of the pandemic, because that's what people think sometimes. Mm-hmm. But it's not really. It's actually the whole system that was destined to be severely affected by shocks like this one that affected everyone. And so basically what they said with this website, the Economic Forum, they said that like the butterfly effect. So when we got to see how this, the flow of supply of goods, so some other companies can manufacture the products, was like slowed down or just completely interrupted by just one country, because Vietnam went into lockdowns. So lots of workers were not allowed to work in the company. So they were not really producing the same amount of goods they used to. And
Mhm.
so that reduced their capacity, but not the capacity, but more like the production they had, and that kind of delayed the goods they sent. So they were like, they produce less, but there were lots of companies asking for products. And we're talking specifically about chips that are used for computers and also for
Ah, yes.
making vehicles.
Yes,
So
I have a
mhm.
student who works for SEAT, for the Spanish car maker, which is a subsidiary of Volkswagen. And I know that they were having issues because uh, I think this is to do with, do you know there's a term in supply chain, um, it's when you receive parts, you don't have a, traditionally, you know, we'd have a big warehouse with lots of parts, right? But then it's costly to keep spare parts, extra parts in a warehouse. So instead, wherever
So
they, yeah.
is it like first in, first out? Like you're getting like this, the way you manage your stocking?
I think what I'm thinking of is, I think they call it just in time.
Just in time,
It's
yes,
the,
just in time. Mhm.
so it's the idea that it's just something's made in China. The plant here in Barcelona sends an order. They calculate how much time, and it basically, it just in time means they receive it and it almost immediately gets incorporated
Yeah,
into
so
the,
everything has to be done in a timely manner. Yeah,
yeah, a
so when
nice
something,
expression.
there is a delay.
Yeah. So
So when
yeah.
there is a
So
delay, that's when the troubles like start to arise, I think.
yeah, exactly. So and earlier you said twice you said it came to my mind. Very small, barely a mistake, but really the we would tend to say it came, something comes to mind, not comes to my mind, but comes to mind.
So it came to mind. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then you talked about a butterfly effect, which is a very poetic expression, almost. The idea.
I read it on the economic forum, and I liked it because it can explain that was supposed to be a minor change for just in a single country, but it affected like the US and so on, some other countries. So it's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and the idea. Do you understand? Do you have any idea why we talk about a butterfly effect?
I don't understand what the question basically.
Well, why butterfly?
Because I think it's because that it is apparently something very simple that is not really supposed to cause any harm here, but then somewhere else, given like the way it is interconnected, like a domino effect on the other side, you can see that actually turns out to be a huge problem. So
Yeah,
that's why I think, and they say that it's butterfly, like the, I don't
I
know how to
think
say this, but like
maybe,
it
I'm sure
causes
you've
like a
read the same thing.
storm.
I know exactly. I've heard some. I don't know if it's true. If it's pop, I don't know if it's true. But the idea of the butterfly, the wind, the tiny amount of wind generated by a butterfly's wings, leading to a hurricane or something kind
Yeah,
of
exactly.
far-fetched, kind of hard to imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we talk about a knock-on effect. You talked about dominoes.
Knock-on
Yeah,
effect.
yeah. So sometimes it's a similar idea, although butterfly's effect is more specific. That's something trivial, incredibly small, leading to something huge. But it's the same idea of something related to cause and effect. So we're talking about a knock-on effect or a ripple effect.
All right, got it.
Have you heard the word ripple before?
Don't think so, but now I think
Yeah,
I got idea.
it's like if you drop something in a pool of water, like a pebble or a stone, and then the small, they're too small to be waves. That's a ripple. That's just a slight, it's like a tiny wave in the water. That's a ripple.
Got it. Okay, like the things you've got in like in lakes and lagoons. They don't have waves, but they just see this
Well, basically, it's just
kind of
if you
little.
drop something in a body of water, and then that those just, it's not,
Ah,
it's just these tiny,
got it.
um,
So it's just more like you drop like a stone into the water, and it causes like a circle and a bigger circle,
yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, like just
Those are
goes
ripples.
like
So
in
they
a,
ripple
yeah.
out. Yeah. So a ripple effect is that something, yeah, gets affected by yeah, so it's something being affected by something else.
Okay.
And why are you interested in this? The issue of, you said it's something else, a neighbor or someone you know who was telling you that?
Yes, one of the not students, but one of the people I talk with, she has like a company in the US, and she told me that she was thinking of like selling the company because it was not worth it anymore, like all of the stress she was putting up with. And now she had this tremendous challenge because she wasn't really getting enough supply what she needed for manufacturing her products, which are like some light bulbs or something like that. And she mentioned that. And then I had previously heard of like the supply chain in the news, but didn't really pay much attention. So I started reading a bit about it, and it turns out to be like something we should all be aware of, like
Yeah,
what that is and how it works, and why it is important to get it fixed as soon as possible. Because in the globalized world, we have this constant flow of goods and also services, I'd say, because sometimes for services you need goods to provide them.
yeah.
It's constant. So something that
By,
is made here is used somewhere else to send it somewhere else.
by
So
the way,
it's all connected.
what do you call when you need raw materials or parts or something?
Isn't that input?
Yeah, but I'm
No.
saying when you lack something that you need, something basic that you need, what do we call that?
I'm not sure. As I told you, I just was interested in acquiring vocabulary. I was learning actually
You're
about
like,
it.
you're the
So
teacher,
guess
Sean. Yes, I'm sure you know the word, a shortage. A shortage.
shortage. Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know it.
So what's happening now is there are shortages of different
I
parts and
actually read it there. Uh-huh.
yeah, a lack of
Yeah.
something. Um, yeah, I did see, maybe it was on the cover of The Economist or some major magazine or newspaper, that was talking about people not having enough, not being able to get the gifts they wanted for their family members at Christmas because of this.
Well, I can't mention a specific goods or products that will be required for manufacturing them, but we have to keep in mind that most of the brands that are very popular in the US, they don't really make those products in the US. Even they have the label of an American brand. They usually manufacture in Southeast Asia. And well, China used to be like the main factory for the world. Yeah, but there are some other countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and what else? Well, I can think of another one. And Bangladesh, in which they also manufacture products for American brands or Italian brands and so on. It happens in fashion too. So what could have happened, and now that I think about it, is that there's been a delay, and also something that makes it harder for goods to get to the shops. It's the ports, because of the restrictions, they had like a slowdown in the efficiency or how quickly they unloaded and loaded the containers so the ships could like depart. So there was a point at the beginning of 2021 in which there were like ships waiting for the tone to get to the decks, so they can unload their containers. So that was like piling up, like adding up to
Nice.
a
Yeah, yeah.
huge effect. So that could be a reason actually, because that hasn't been fixed yet. It has like improved a little. There's been like a speed up in the way this is done, this performed, but it's still not in the way it used to be like in 2020 or 2019, I think. So it is still causing some troubles, and we cannot talk that it's over. And it won't be actually. It's because of the system itself, the way it works.
Yeah.
Why?
Do you think this will lead to any changes in the way companies do business?
I hope so, and that's what they recommend. Like based on the readings I did, they say that the problem is not the pandemic, the problem is not the restrictions. What those things did was just exacerbate some problems, some issues that were already like present. So they mentioned like they were like in red numbers or something. No, that's not the word. But the thing is that there were some issues
Slow down.
already in the system.
Well, what's that about red numbers?
I read it somewhere because I wrote down some terms that I found interesting when I was doing the reading.
Maybe you're talking about being in the red?
Mm, not exactly. No, they were running red hot. That's the term I wrote down
They
here.
were running red
Run,
hot.
yeah, but I'm not quite sure what that means
You're
actually.
talking about factories?
I don't remember because I read like 3 websites, and I also went like through some opinion websites, so I don't
So red
remember
hot,
actually.
maybe in the sense that like if something machinery heats up, I mean,
I don't think it
something
was like
metal, if it's
context.
red hot, it means it's so hot, it becomes almost incandescent, it becomes red from the heat.
Don't know why they used it. I don't remember right now because I should have like written down the whole sentence. Yeah, but I know red numbers basically means that going in bankruptcy or something like that, I think.
Speaking of which, normally when you're reading, what's your system for, or do you have a system for keeping track of vocabulary?
So so I do the reading, I read out loud actually. Not that I'm in love with my own voice, but I like try to like to make the sounds and like compare them, because sometimes and those are words that I've heard before, like in the news or something like that. So I read, and I also like feel like I understand more. Like it makes sense what I'm reading. It's like someone is reading for me. It's myself. Yeah. So I do that. When I find a term, what happens is that I most of the time like sense what it might mean, but I just
Aha.
cannot think what what the exact meaning is. So that's when I just stop, write it down. If it's necessary, like I write the sentence with quotation marks, and I just go to a dictionary for the definition, but everything in English. Just like sometimes I don't know what the word is in Spanish, like
Yeah.
because I look at the meaning, and if it makes sense, then it's fine. I just like think about it, own it, and I read it again, and now I feel like I have like understood the idea of the sentence. But
Yeah.
if that doesn't work, that's when I simply just go for that bilingual dictionary, because I
Yeah.
may know and understand the word in
Yeah.
Spanish.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with resorting to a dictionary. If you resort to something, it means you. I was just going to say it in Spanish because I'm so used to translating. It's a bad habit, I suppose, of teaching students who speak. All my students speak Spanish, so or Catalan. So, but if you resort to something, it's sometimes people say, a bilingual dictionary should only be used as a last resort, meaning only when you've run out of other options. Personally,
And it shouldn't.
well, I'm. I think language teachers should be careful about the ideas like. Yeah, we need to be careful about telling our students things that are maybe not only not true, but are the contrary of what's good best practice. Or, I mean, I don't necessarily think there's such thing as best practice, but I think there's good practice. And telling students not to translate is, I mean, you've learned English to a high level. I've learned Spanish and French to a high level. I translate all the time, even though, I mean, I did a master's in Spanish. I've lived in Spain for 12 years. I still look things up in a bilingual dictionary. I think students shouldn't be shamed for using a bilingual dictionary, because certain specific things it's much easier. But in any case, the most important
Yeah.
thing I think is using a dictionary, because a lot of teachers, another myth that teachers say is, oh, we'll just use the context. And that for me is
Yeah.
the worst advice a teacher can give a student, especially high level students, because once you're at this level, what happens is I'll often ask students, well, do you want to know what this word means? Yes. I say, use it in a sentence. And that's, to me, that's the litmus test.
Again?
Have you heard of
Please.
litmus test?
No.
There's little strips of
Nope.
paper. I think it's to test the acidity of water. I can't remember. It's these little strips of paper that it's used for. It's got a
Yeah,
scientific
I
name.
know that thing, but I don't know like the
Yeah,
first part, like in the language
yeah. So we
context.
use something
I know the other thing.
a litmus test in the metaphorical or in the broader sense is um, um, the kind of not a gold standard, but it's a test. So yeah, so the litmus test. If like when students are going, well, should I take the time to look this up? It's like, well, are you able to use it confidently? If you aren't, that for me, that's the litmus test. That's the standard. And I think it's, I mean, it depends also in what context you're in. If you're in an exam, you've got to rely on context. But if on an everyday basis, you've got to be looking things up. I mean, I've many times even English words that I've assumed, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that means. And then I look it up and I think, I didn't know I couldn't use it properly.
It happens to me in Spanish too. Sometimes a word may sound familiar and you might, like, it's like not a false cognate that would be from one language to another, but sometimes even in Spanish, it happens to me that I think I know the word, and I found myself like using a word that was very specific and a very common, like in the wrong way. So even in Spanish, as a native Spanish speaker, I sometimes have to look words up to make sure that I'm using it right. So needless to say, when you're learning another language, it's true. I encourage them to use the dictionary. But what I do most of the time, what I do is like to explain the usage, because I haven't taught and I can't teach anyone who's at an advanced level, of course. But sometimes they ask you like, what is the meaning of this or this expression? Most of the time with expressions, what I do is just like to describe when it is used, and I like provide them a couple of examples. And sometimes I do that, ask them like to provide a context or a sentence in which they could use it. And most of the time it works. Like it's worked for me like maybe 80% of the time. But it's because they were not at an advanced level. So most of the time I just like idioms or expressions, and some of them have like an equivalent in Spanish, so they can like automatically match that expression to something they already know.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you use, for example, do you use flashcards?
We use them like for young learners. Like for students, not really, because we have this vocabulary, like we got a textbook, we follow that as a Bible, to be honest. And as you know, I'm not someone whose background is like in education, so I just like follow what they told me to do, which I don't think is bad because it works. We've seen the results in the students.
Sorry?
So we've seen the results, like some good results with the students, like the before and after is good. Maybe it could be better. But the thing is that we just look at the words, they got a picture, and sometimes we look at the definition, which is written there. And then we just try to use it because with the grammar, like the vocabulary, use it with the grammar that is provided in every single chapter and so on. So like flashcards, getting like a piece of paper this big or smaller, like with the picture, with the word here and the image here, no, we don't really do that. Or at least I don't. We use it for students who are not teenagers, basically.
Yeah, I do recommend. Okay, so Paul Nation, who is an expert in second language acquisition, claims that there are studies that show about the impact of using flashcards is huge. So there's really no, I'm going to sound like a bit of a bit extreme here, but there's really, it's a crying shame not to use flashcards. Partly because he says, guess how much time he says should be spent reviewing vocabulary that you've already seen, or structures, grammar structures.
I have no idea.
Yeah, about a third of the time. I don't think that necessarily you have to stick to that number religiously, but the point is a big chunk of time when you're learning a language should be devoted to revision. And flashcards are an excellent way to revise. And it's also, if you teach your students to do it well, it's a way of taking pressure off the teacher. So you're increasing what students learn, and you're not without the kind of unnecessary pressure to keep teaching. And yeah, so there's as you'll see on the podcast website, I embed Quizlet flashcards on my.
Yeah, I saw that.
So Quizlet if your students, or if even forget your students for now, but for yourself, I highly recommend Quizlet, or there's another one called Anki, and the recording content in flashcards, either physical or electronic. It's an expression. It's a game changer.
Mhm.
Have you heard that expression before?
Yeah, I've heard it before.
Yeah.
Most of the things I consume when it comes to entertainment, it's in English. I know I waste my time on social media sometimes, but I'm glad to say that it's in English. Because sometimes I get like some words there. Not the quickest, the most efficient way to acquire vocabulary, I know, but
Yeah, well, we
that
might
doesn't
actually
hurt that
say
much.
you're saying by listening to things in English. Is that what you're saying?
No, but basically on Instagram. So sometimes you find not even like language learning videos or reels, but things that interest me, like that I feel I want to know more about, or even just mere entertainment.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, sometimes we say things that pique your interest.
To pick my interest.
No, listen, pique, Pique.
Huh.
Yeah, I think it's originally a French word.
New one for sure.
Yeah, if something piques your interest, you go, oh, that's interesting. That's piqued my interest.
All right, regular.
Okay, so any other, have we got anything more to say about supply chain?
Yeah, we were talking about it. So you asked me whether this was going to change or not based on like what happened. So based on the readings I went through, they said that it's highly recommendable because this system used to work back then when it was invented, when they started like in the like in the 20th century, they started with this, like in late 20th century, I think. But even before that, when we had like this Silk Road in which they were exchanging goods throughout Asia to Europe, that could be like some sort of not so developed idea of supply chain because of the way it works. But the idea is there. So yeah, it evolved a little bit in the late 20th century. But what we didn't think of was that the world back then was not as connected as it is now, and it's not as interdependent as it is now. So the biggest mistake they made is that they kind of assigned nodes all across the globe in which this X product must be manufactured here and this Y product must be manufactured there for making this other product. So you can see that the points of supply for those products, or let's say like components or equipment for manufacturing the products, was only relying on one place. So there were nodes all across the globe, but the thing is that there isn't one node that is making the same as that is being made in somewhere else. So in case that one fails or is like interrupted for some reason, you basically have a cut in the flow or a disruption, and that's when it starts like causing the effect we see nowadays. So what they recommend is that we should start diversifying those nodes in which we manufacture products, because there is something called comparative advantage. We know like for some countries, it is less expensive or simply cheaper to manufacture certain products that will be more expensive to manufacture in the US, for instance. So it makes sense to do that. But the point is that there must be at least more than one place in which you can like ask them to make those products. So in case this doesn't work, well, you have some sort of backup plan, or at least the interruption that is made doesn't cause such a big effect in the economies. And yeah, so what we have seen is that because of that, businesses and companies, the big ones, they have started finding more locations for manufacturing their products, or the products they need for providing the services or making some other goods. So they said that they are set in the right direction if they are like planning to transition from that old idea to a new one that is basically the same. We are all connected and we need each other. But let's make it more efficient. It's gonna cost a lot because you need a lot of investment, not only in capital, but also in like the know-how and stuff like that, because you
Nice
might
use
find
of,
some.
hold on, slow down, because some of the listeners and viewers might not be familiar with that. Know-how. Yeah, so know-how mean, what does know-how mean?
Like they know how to do it because
Exactly.
yeah, so
So, I
you
mean,
might know the theory, but they got experience.
so technical know-how means an accumulation of knowledge and expertise. Yeah, because you know how to do something, you know how to deal with, yeah. What you were talking about before about the making, backup plans, and another expression we use sometimes is making contingency plans.
Mhm.
Like
It's so
it's
weird. I know some of the words that like the version of the words that are like fancier, more advanced, I guess. But they don't come naturally to my mind, and I just use another one that I seems to be way common. Like backup plan, I think it's fine,
That's perfectly
but
fine. I
then
mean, no, contingency plan is quite
I think
specific.
it's quite specific, and it's like the right word. That's why we would use in Spanish as well. But it just didn't come to my mind naturally, like
It
this
didn't
way.
come, it didn't come to mind.
Gosh, it didn't come to mind. I gotta work on it. It didn't come to mind naturally.
Yeah,
So
this is a minor thing. I know a lot of students say that. It's not a huge issue, to be honest. What was I going to say? But I
I
mean, it's
think
also, I
that
mean, yeah, carry on.
no, sorry. I was just
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, well, I think this is a good place to take a break and, well, say, call it a day. That's another expression to put it to, let's call it a day.
All right.
Meaning let's stop working. Let's stop here. So we're going to call it a day, and maybe we'll have you on here again and to talk about something else. And do you have any final comments or questions?
Well, questions not really, but comments about like the supply chain thing is that now I hope I have given you like a wider idea of what it is, and also the why it is important for us to know how it works, so we understand the current situation in countries like in the US, or why some businesses had increased like the prices in their goods, because scarcity is one of the drivers for the setting of the price for goods. So because of that happened, that is no surprise for us to see some goods that have turned or become more pricier, actually, with a higher price. It is somewhat affected by what's going on globally with the supply chain.
Very nice. I want to repeat, you mentioned a word, scarcity.
Yeah.
Yeah, very,
But
very,
scarcity is just like perhaps no, it's that it's not abundant because you got supply and demand. So the
oh
demand
no,
is pretty high.
yeah. So if there's scarcity, it means that there's an extreme lack of something that you're, yeah. So
Yeah, but that's not exactly what I meant, but that's the thing, that demand didn't really go down. It's just that the supply that had a slowdown, and because there were lots of people who didn't stop like wanting or like demanding those products, and but the supply didn't just react at the same level it used to,
yeah.
and that just
Oh,
caused an increase in prices. And some say that it's even one, but not specifically, but it has to do a little bit with what's going on with inflation rate in the US.
okay. Now, okay. Now, now I'm gonna. Okay, I feel really out of my depths. I mean,
Yeah.
I did study. I studied political science at university. I studied history, but I never got around to doing economics. So there's some things that make me feel
It
very.
might be wrong actually, because I'm not an expert. So if there is an economist who is listening to this
Is it? Yes.
podcast,
If
please
someone.
forgive me if I'm just like making things up. I
Right.
do my best. I did my reading, and that's based on what I understood and what I can remember from college. So if
And I
I'm wrong
wanted
about
to
that,
say
just
something.
forgive me.
I wanted to say something. I also heard that people were saying that one of the issues was that um, because the pandemic, at least in some places, people were able to basically people have money to spare,
Subsidize.
money
Uh-huh.
extra People have. So some people talk about there being what we call, often when we talk about demand, we can talk about pent up demand.
Come again? Sorry, please
Pent
repeat.
up, P-E-N-T, pent, 2 words, pent up demand. So if something is pent up, it's kind of artificially contained, restricted. So basically people couldn't go out to shops. They could still shop online, but basically because of lockdowns, people were restricted in their movements. So that led to a buildup. So then there was this like a dam bursting. So
Okay.
I think there's also that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure they increase some of that. Like some they're winners and losers in this thing that we are still going through. So pharmacy or drug companies are like the biggest winners, but they also like online shops and like, what's the word for this, electronic e-commerce as well, that has like, it has been boosted by what happened because we had no choice. And it's true
Sorry,
that kind of
boosted. Yes, yeah.
because of that. So it is some sort of like a milestone for e-commerce, because I don't think that people are going to go back the way it used to be before this pandemic. I mean, some things are going to be presential, perhaps like face-to-face spaces, but some other things are just like are going to be online for good, like permanently. And some people transition, some others just had to reinvent themselves and so on. But speaking of like these people who have like spend money, I think there were some governments. I'm not sure if it was the US, because I watched a video by The Economist. They said that the Americans love buying cars and like renewing a car, like getting a new car every 5 years or so. So there weren't enough cars, like new cars manufactured, because what I just said before. And so they went for
Sometimes we say there weren't enough new cars to go around.
to go around. So there weren't
Meaning there
enough.
wasn't, if there was a shortage of supply in informal industry, there wasn't enough to go around.
Okay, so there weren't enough cars to go around, and that caused a movement on the focus of the potential purchasers to secondhand cars, like used cars. So that even drove up like the prices on like secondhand on used cars that used to be like cheap, and then the option for those who didn't have like enough to get a new one. So that is also something that increased prices. And as everything is connected, that's why they said it might do something with what's going on in the US with the inflation rate, because that thing, they had the spare money and so on, they wanted new cars, well, they were supposed to spend it like for goods, like perishable goods like food and whatever, but they went for another thing. But the thing is that has something to do with the effect it might have had in the current inflation going on in the US, which is also related to the supply chain. So that's what I found why I found it so interesting.
Okay, so what you need to do, Iván, is you need to create a YouTube channel or a podcast about economics, and then you invite me on as a guest, and I will ask you questions about inflation and not everything else that I don't know about.
I like to go through my notes, because I know what that is for definition, but there is a whole theory or like explanations behind it. So it's interesting, because that's why I like economics, because it helps you understand not everything, obviously, but some of like the way we are organized in the societies as well, and how it works. That's why I like it. I like when things make sense in a practical way.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for being on the show, and yeah, it's been nice chatting.
Yeah, I loved it, and thank you for having me on your show. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Okay, as we say in English, don't be a stranger. That means stay in touch. Okay.
Don't be a stranger.
Don't be a stranger.
I know what that means, but it's weird. Like, could I say that, like, don't be a stranger?
It means don't hesitate to get in touch, to send me an email, to give me a call. That's what it means.
So you would simply say like, Iván, don't be a stranger, and I shouldn't freak out. Like say, what is he talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just means I look forward to. It's a more informal way of saying I look forward to staying in touch.
Well, so do I. Yeah, love to be in the center of attention this time.
Great. Okay, glad to hear it. Okay, bye.
Bye.